The courtroom was alive with whispers, a mix of curiosity and tension filling the air. At the center of it all stood a tall black man, his wrists shackled, his suit crisp and unyielding. Across the aisle, the arresting officer leaned back, a smug grin on his face, fully expecting the man's downfall to be swift and merciless. But as the judge scanned the paperwork, that grin disappeared in an instant. The officer's confidence melted into dread as the room collectively held its breath, realizing there was more to this man than they had imagined. This wasn't just any ordinary case. It was the culmination of a day that had started in the most unexpected way. Earlier that morning, Marcus Carter, a man known for his quiet strength and dedication to justice, walked through his suburban neighborhood with purpose. Carrying his briefcase, he was on his way to an important meeting at the courthouse. Along the way, he paused to help an elderly woman struggling with her groceries, embodying the values of kindness and community he held dear. What began as an act of compassion quickly spiraled into a moment that would test every ounce of his patience and resilience. A police officer, his mind already clouded with bias, saw Marcus not as a man, but as a threat. And that misjudgment would lead to a chain of events no one in that courtroom could have foreseen. This is Real Life Stories New, where we explore the moments that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience. Stick with us as we uncover how Marcus Carter transformed humiliation into triumph, standing tall against prejudice and proving that justice, when pursued with dignity and courage, can prevail. As Marcus Carter approached the elderly woman, her frail hands trembling under the weight of her groceries, he didn't think twice. Setting down his briefcase, he carefully transferred the bags from her grasp to the bench beside her. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice soft with gratitude, her eyes glistening. Marcus offered a small, reassuring smile. For him, these small acts of kindness were part of his daily life, a reflection of the values his parents had instilled in him. He turned to leave, retrieving his briefcase, but as he straightened, he noticed the police cruiser. It slowed to a crawl, the officer inside locking eyes with him through the windshield. Marcus felt the weight of that gaze, a cold, piercing stare that seemed to strip away his humanity. The cruiser stopped. The door creaked open, and a young officer stepped out, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "You there," the officer barked, his voice cutting through the quiet of the morning. "Stay where you are." Marcus stood still, heart pounding, his thoughts racing. He wasn't breaking any laws. He hadn't done anything remotely suspicious. But he knew from experience that logic often played no role in encounters like these. The officer approached, his expression hard and unyielding. "Let me see your ID," the officer demanded. Marcus complied, maintaining his composure. The officer scrutinized the identification card as though searching for a flaw, then began tossing out vague accusations: loitering, suspicious behavior, possibly theft. None of it made sense. Marcus felt a flicker of anger rise in his chest but forced it down. Arguing wouldn't help. He'd been in situations like this before, where judgment was passed before a single word was exchanged. The elderly woman tried to intervene. "He didn't do anything wrong. He was just helping me," she said, her voice trembling. "Step aside, ma'am," the officer snapped, cutting her off without a second glance. "I'll handle this." The confrontation escalated quickly. Despite Marcus' calm demeanor and full cooperation, the officer decided to detain him. Before he could fully register what was happening, Marcus found himself pinned against the cruiser, his arm wrenched behind his back. A sharp pain shot through his shoulder as the cold metal of handcuffs bit into his wrists. The humiliation stung more than the physical discomfort. He could feel the weight of strangers' eyes on him, their curiosity mingling with fear and pity. At the station, things only got worse. The officer smirked as he processed Marcus, treating him with a dismissive arrogance. His briefcase was thrown carelessly onto a desk, spilling its contents, neatly organized documents and files, across the surface. The officer didn't even glance at them, but Marcus couldn't help but feel the irony. These were legal documents he had prepared for an important court case. Big meeting, huh? The officer mocked. Yeah, sure. And I'm the mayor. The sarcasm was dripping, but Marcus refused to rise to the bait. Years of dealing with prejudice had taught him that his greatest weapon was self-control. Still, the indignity of being fingerprinted, photographed, and treated like a criminal weighed heavily on him. Fragments of whispered conversations reached his ears, station staff speculating about what he'd done. Must have been something serious, one said. Probably fraud or something. Look at that suit, another added. The assumptions were almost laughable in their absurdity, but Marcus couldn't summon any humor in the moment. Instead, he thought of the countless others who had been in his position, who didn't have the resources or resilience to fight back. This wasn't just about him, it was about something much bigger. As the hours dragged on, Marcus' requests for a phone call were ignored. He was left to sit on a hard bench, wrists aching from the cuffs, until the officer finally informed him he would face a judge the next morning. The officer's smirk returned as he leaned in, his voice low and taunting. "Let's see how tough you are in court," he said. Marcus said nothing. His silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. He knew what awaited in that courtroom, even if the officer did not. The next morning, Marcus was escorted into the courthouse, handcuffed and exhausted from a sleepless night. As he stepped inside, heads began to turn. A ripple of recognition passed through the room. Court staff who knew Marcus froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock as they saw him shackled like a common criminal. The officer who had arrested him stood nearby, arms crossed, still wearing that overconfident grin. But as the judge began reading the charges aloud, that grin began to falter. Resisting arrest. Suspicious behavior. They were flimsy at best, and everyone in the room could see it. Then came the moment of truth. "Mr. Marcus Carter," the judge said, glancing at the paperwork before looking directly at the officer. "State's chief prosecutor." The courtroom erupted into a stunned silence, broken only by the officer's sharp intake of breath. His face turned pale, and the bravado that had carried him through the previous day evaporated in an instant. Marcus, now free of his cuffs, stood tall. His voice was steady as he recounted the events, the humiliation, and the baseless accusations. Surveillance footage and witness testimony corroborated his story, leaving no room for doubt. The judge's expression darkened as she addressed the officer, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "This was a blatant abuse of authority," she said. "An inquiry into your conduct will begin immediately." The officer tried to stammer an apology, but his words held no weight in the face of the evidence. Marcus, meanwhile, remained composed, his dignity intact. As he stepped out of the courtroom, the morning sun warming his face, he thought not of his own vindication, but of the larger fight against injustice that still lay ahead. As Marcus Carter walked out of the courthouse, the sun casting its warmth over the steps, he carried more than his vindication, he carried a renewed determination. The crowd that had gathered outside looked at him with a mix of awe and admiration. Some approached him with words of encouragement, while others stood silently, processing the profound turn of events they had just witnessed. Marcus could have gloated, could have let anger fuel his words, but instead, he chose grace. He paused, letting the moment sink in, and then spoke directly to the reporters and bystanders who had gathered. "This isn't just about me," Marcus began, his voice steady but full of conviction. "This is about every person who has ever been judged unfairly, treated unjustly, or silenced because of the color of their skin. Today, we saw justice prevail, but there are so many others who don't get this chance. That's why we must keep fighting, not with hate, but with courage, dignity, and the truth." The crowd murmured in agreement, some even applauding. Marcus turned and walked away with his head held high, not as a victim, but as a beacon of resilience and a reminder that change is possible when we stand firm against injustice. This story isn't just about Marcus Carter, it's about the fight for equality, dignity, and justice in everyday life. It's a call to action for all of us to look beyond stereotypes and challenge the biases that hold us back as a society. Marcus' journey reminds us that while the road may be difficult, standing up for what's right can inspire change far beyond ourselves. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the world differently or inspired you to take action, we encourage you to like, share, and comment below. Your voice helps stories like Marcus reach more people and spark meaningful conversations. And don't forget to subscribe to Real Life Stories New. Together, let's reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers and continue sharing stories that matter, stories that remind us of the power of courage, empathy, and justice. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story that changes lives.